We have 6-4 Iowa State taking on 9-1 Oklahoma. This game is going to be played on Fox with a 12 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff. Oklahoma is a 4-point favorite. The last time we saw Iowa State last week, they were defeated by Texas Tech 41-38, a very surprising loss, and Oklahoma was defeated by Baylor last week 27-14. Now, everybody's going to be asking the question, how will Oklahoma respond after suffering that loss to Baylor? Because if you actually watch that game, the score was a little bit more one-sided than what it may indicate. It says 27-14, but Baylor pretty much dominated that game. Baylor did every single thing that they wanted to against that OU defense when it came to the run game. Like, they doggone near gave up 300 rushing yards on the ground. They gave up 296, but Oklahoma looked like the second most physical team in that matchup. I mean, Oklahoma got pushed around. They got beat down up front. And this game was fairly close in the first half, and it probably shouldn't have been because Baylor left a lot of points on the board. There also were a lot of emphasis where you thought that Oklahoma was going to be able to find a way to escape and win this game because Baylor had a couple of crucial turnovers. They also had some missed field goals, but Oklahoma didn't really look like themselves offensively. They were struggling to generate big plays. They were struggling to have efficiency moving the football. They didn't have a good day on the ground. They had less than 100 rushing yards as a team. Meanwhile, you look at Iowa State. Iowa State is known to be a defensive-minded team. They don't really give up a lot of points. They don't really give up a lot of big plays. Well, against Texas Tech, it was a complete polar opposite. Like, Texas Tech's offense was really rolling. You had Brock Purdy, who had a couple of critical interceptions. Breece Hall had 2 touchdowns on the day, but he didn't really have a crazy day through the ground. He had 2.8 yards per carry, 51 rushing yards. And I think a large reason for that was because Iowa State kind of had to get out of a hole early. They had to play catch up from behind, in my opinion, and they had to keep up with Texas Tech. And I also feel like for Iowa State to win this game, they're going to have Breece Hall have a big day, because Oklahoma's run defense before they played Baylor was pretty good. I believe it was somewhere in the top 20s. So if you're Iowa State, I don't really think you're going to be built to win a shootout with Oklahoma. Now, could you somewhat keep up if you do get into a shootout? Yeah, but I don't really think getting into shootouts is Iowa State's brand of football. Iowa State's brand of football is running the football 20 to 25 times with Breece Hall and beating you with great defense. Now, will Oklahoma's defense struggle to slow down Breece Hall is my question, because last week Baylor's rushing attack was absolutely on fire, and in the second half it really caught up to them. Now, Oklahoma's defense, believe it or not, is a lot better than what a lot of people give it credit for. I know you go back and you look at the stats, they're not going to be in the favorite of Oklahoma, but there were a couple of games this year where Oklahoma's defense actually suited up and came ready to play. And I feel like last week their defense didn't really get any credit for how they performed in that game, because their defense kept them around in that game until midway through the fourth quarter, where Baylor was finally able to break it open and close the hatch and lock it on OU. But their defense came up and made some crucial plays. They had a couple of crucial turnovers where the offense wasn't able to get things going. They had some big stops. It's just that the offense wasn't really able to get anything going. So Oklahoma's defensive effort was kind of put in vain. But Oklahoma's defense definitely is a little bit underrated. My guy, Juice Alert, kind of alerted to that. Make sure that you guys go ahead and check out the Juice Alert podcast. But I feel like OU's defense is going to be able to come in this game, and they're going to be able to have a bounce back performance, because I know the stats indicate OU doesn't have a great defense, but if you watch a couple of games like the West Virginia game or even last week against Baylor, like, the defense kept them around in those games. It's just that last week, sadly, Oklahoma's offense wasn't really able to capitalize. Now, Caleb Williams had a really hard day last week against Baylor on the road. And I wasn't really surprised because one of my biggest questions heading into that game for OU is going to be how was Caleb Williams going to respond going on the road in his first ever hostile road environment against a really highly ranked opponent. And he didn't really fare too well. He also had an injury that he dealt with in the second quarter of that game. So he wasn't really himself. They tried to put Spencer Rattler in to try to get a spark late, and it didn't really work. They ended up putting Caleb Williams back in later in the fourth quarter when the game was pretty much out of reach. And I guess the reason why Lincoln Riley decided to do that was because he wanted to show people that, hey, Caleb Williams is going to be our starting quarterback moving forward. So how is Caleb Williams going to respond in this game? Because he had a lackluster performance last week. He missed a lot of wide open receivers. He had a lot of big overthrows. Like, Caleb Williams didn't look like the quarterback that we saw when he took over halfway through the Texas game, which opted Lincoln Riley to make the midseason quarterback change. I'm wondering what he's going to look like in this game against a really good Iowa State defense. Baylor also has a really good defense. So I'm really intrigued in seeing how he bounces back. You know what people always say, it's not about what happens when you get knocked back down. It's about what happens when you get back up and how you respond. Response is everything in life. So how can you respond after having a down week is my biggest question for Caleb Williams, because what if he has another game that he struggles in and you got to reinsert Spencer Rattler back into the game? The offensive line also wasn't great, and the offensive line for Oklahoma has been a big talking point for OU fans this year. This probably has been the worst offensive line that Oklahoma has put on the field, and God knows when, because when you think about Oklahoma's offensive lines are always pretty good. They put a lot of guys into the NFL. So the offensive line performance this year has been lackluster, to say the least. And you're going against an Iowa State defense that I think has a pretty good defensive line. So if you're not able to find different ways to get the ball out of your quarterback's hands, or you have to rely on routes that take a long time to develop, you probably could find yourself in a little bit more trouble. But when it comes to the run game for Oklahoma, you had less than 100 yards, but I think they're probably going to try to use Caleb Williams a little bit more on the ground, because that's where Oklahoma had the most success last week at times, was when they called quarterback design runs with Caleb Williams, because he's a really good runner, pretty big, strong as well. Now, for Iowa State, what you need to do offensively, first of all, Brock Purdy cannot turn the ball over, needs to take care of the football. Iowa State doesn't really have a lot of dynamic weapons besides Hall at running back. So for Iowa State, they're probably going to want to try to keep this game close going into fourth quarter, because if Iowa State gets down by more than 2 possessions at any point in this game, I think this game is pretty much over, because Iowa State wants to play that brand of football where they want to be scrappy and they want to hang with you. And I think for Oklahoma, I don't think Oklahoma is going to allow that to happen. I just think that Oklahoma's offense is going to be able to respond well coming off that loss against Baylor, and I'm going to take Oklahoma to get the victory. 34-21 is my final score prediction in this game. I'm going to take Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma's defense should play pretty well in this game. They're pretty good against the run prior to that Baylor game. I know their secondary isn't the greatest, but I look at this Iowa State offense, like, if you're an Oklahoma fan, you shouldn't be scared about OU's defense going into this game, because I don't really have a lot of confidence in Iowa State's offense. Like, it's not really that impressive. It don't really feature a lot of dynamic playmakers who are going to scare you and put fear into your heart. And Iowa State still could score some points and things like that. This is a 4-point game in favor of Oklahoma, but I just really like Oklahoma in this matchup coming off a loss against Baylor. I think that's what they needed. I feel like this team is going to come out better. They're going to be more focused. They're going to be able to make some adjustments. That's why I got to take OU to get the victory here. I'm taking Oklahoma.